Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold, while I hoard internet cringe. When you think about it, Dungeons & Dragons is kinda genius. Not because of their marketing or easy-to-understand gameplay, but because D&D is one of the only games where you can yeet the rulebook into the nearest wood chipper and still be able to call what comes out the other side Dungeons & Dragons. The game is designed for you to be able to play fast and loose with the rules. In fact, in the book itself, it literally says that the DM can straight up veto anything that can be found within the pages. For the most part, this is a good thing. Every game of D&D is different, but there's definitely a line that can be crossed here. The story I have for you today stars a DM who creates a stranglehold over his game by constantly changing the rules, only for said stranglehold to squeeze whatever life was left right out of his whole campaign. Now, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right into the horrifying world of r/RPGHorrorstories. Enjoy. This week's story comes to us from Reddit user Eddie and is titled DM Destroys His Game with Constant Rule Changes. As the title states, this is the story of the DM slowly strangling his own game with rule changes, threats to ban players for questioning said rule changes, and plenty of other things. So it all started when I joined a Roll20 game. It was a Pathfinder version of some 5e super dungeon. When I asked the party what they were missing, I was told that their party had just lost the mage and lacked any real damage output. So I opted to build a high damage focused mage. The party consisted of a dwarven cleric, a half-orc fighter, a blood rager, barbarian/sorcerer for those who don't know, and a DMPC, a super archer who had some of the most bonkers and weird items and abilities I have ever seen, including a longbow that spat out 3d8 damage per attack. Oh, and another player I can't really remember, only really notable for leaving midway through this story. Now, a pure damage-focused mage is more than capable of splattering most single-target encounters, second-level spells doing 10d6 plus 30 damage. However, one of the biggest downsides is that my build was mono-element. I was also at about 80 HP while the rest was at 120 plus. We were playing at level 10. Things were interesting from the moment I joined. I was told that we were only allowed to use base and core books, nothing else. So I started to plan my character, asking each step of the way what was and what was not allowed, as some players were using stuff not from those books. Then I was informed that I could use anything on a specific website, so I restarted my character. It was only after that I had finished my character that I was informed that we were not starting with full starting wealth. Now, I'm pretty forgiving for these sorts of things. Every TM has their own "this is how we roll" specifics. Even I myself have a few very odd house rules. It's really not a big issue, it just takes some time. So it was only a few minutes before the first session that I got my character finished. It is worth stating that before we get into it, that the DM says several times, usually once or twice per session, that he has run this game for several years, often for several player groups per week, and that he has tens of thousands of hours running it. He would often use this to justify his actions. The first few sessions were mostly uneventful. We slashed, stabbed, and shot our way through the dungeon. Now, most players would expect a level of a super dungeon that was a challenge to 10th level characters to have some significant loot. We, however, found basically nothing. These were also the sessions where I found that the party was highly unbalanced. The fighter and the cleric were far less combat focused than the other two party members, the fighter only really being capable of fighting as a meat shield, and the cleric being somewhere between a heal bot and a crafter cleric. Now, I've gone over my damage caster. The blood rager had some kind of mount that was basically unhittable. The DMPC was dumping arrows downrange at a rate of 6 attacks a round with the 3d8 bow. It was only when we left to go sell what paltry loot that we had that things started to not add up. Items are not sold for 50% value, but 25%. Weapons cannot go beyond +3, and scrolls cost unfathomable amounts of money. A level 1 scroll is 600 gold pieces, and it only got worse from there. When questioned what the logic of this was, his answer was, "If you had the money, you should just leave. You could just leave the dungeon and it would be pointless." I was slightly confused, as I was under the impression that we were doing this for reasons beyond money, but okay. I'm not very equipment focused, I just need the big 3 and that's it. Now, this wouldn't have been an issue, but the DMPC never took a loot cut, and was continuously kitted out with new and better equipment that we could never hope to afford. Over these sessions, one of the players is hopping in late or leaving early, mostly for work or other things. Eventually, he drops the game altogether, leaving us with 4 players and the DMPC. Over the next few sessions, for one reason or another, we're down a player. Even myself sometimes because of work and life. Several of these are cancelled because the Blood Rager refuses to play without a full party. So if we're down 1 player, leaving us with 3 plus the DMPC, he'll refuse to play, dropping us down to 2. Now, if we were doing a plot-based game with lots of roleplay and character growth, I would agree, but we're not. So the game slows down somewhat, and we're often down 1 player, and the DM keeps making a big deal about how if we go deeper we might die because it's so difficult. So, being down 1 player for good and often down another because of life, we decide that it'll be a good idea to go through the upper levels, since they were never mapped. Another ruling the DM put in was that no one but the dwarfs knew anything about stonework to map anything. So we start going through the upper levels. The first few things we encounter are pretty low level. The floor is supposed to be for 5th level characters, so it seems reasonable that the other things we encounter are not super scary. Most rooms are cleared by AoE spells, Cone of Cold, Fireball, etc, etc. This is where the first, hold on, what? Ruling comes in. Prior to this, the DM has let us loot any dead bodies. However, this time when creatures are killed, the DM states that because we use magic, their equipment is destroyed. When this is raised, he refuses to listen to the players. When I link to the official ruling, he threatens to kick me unless I give him page numbers. So I go find the page numbers. He then states that it doesn't matter anyway because the undead knights we all killed have nothing on them anyway. Then we start encountering trolls. Remember, this is a floor for level 5 characters. We are fighting 3 to 7 trolls at a time, each with over 200 HP. At first, these are normal trolls, so everyone goes, "Ah, trolls, use fire!" And so we do. Flaming arrows, weapon buffs, etc, etc. I stick to acid, which is my element. With his DM outputting stupid damage and me still doing full damage, we put them down pretty easy. A session or 2 later, more trolls. Turns out, fire doesn't work on these guys. So I asked the DM, "Can I roll knowledge to see what they're weak to?" And he goes, "Yeah, sure." And these turn out to be rock trolls. Okay, not a big deal. So everyone else focuses on knocking the trolls down and I use acid to finish them off. Sometimes I'll tag them with acid and let someone else finish them off because it's easier. After some pointed questioning, the DM reveals that regeneration in his mind isn't, it regenerates X much health unless it takes damage from these sources, then it stops regenerating for a turn and it could die in that turn. It is, it regenerates endlessly unless you deal damage equal to twice its total HP or kill it with its specific weakness. Okay. So now the only person who can kill these creatures is me, the Acid Mage, and his DMPC with huge damage. Or the Blood Rager, when he's here, because the huge damage. This is somewhat annoying, but we can handle it. Then we encounter more trolls. These ones are immune to fire and acid, and have no elements that can shut off their regeneration. So no one but the DMPC and the Blood Rager can do anything. and as an acid caster, I'm hobbled. Now, I totally understand that this is a weakness of my build, but to have 4 sessions of every monster being immune to my attacks is pretty annoying. So I changed my spell list the next rest we have. So a while back, I actually used an example that was eerily similar to this troll situation for how you might deal with metagaming. That moral of that story was that DMs can change rules as they please to improve the game experience. So it's kind of funny now that we have a story that's preaching the exact opposite. It just goes to show that there's always going to be a gray area with this kind of thing, you know? Yeah, you can always shift things to match your whims, but why would you do that if it's not explicitly to make the game more fun? That would make about as much sense as trading a WNBA player who smoked a little of the danky dank for a real-life supervillain literally called the Merchant of Death. But I digress. Basically, your job as a DM is to fulfill one purpose and one purpose alone. Make the game as enjoyable as possible for everyone involved. If you change the rules to make your life easier at the expense of the players, then you're doing it wrong. But if you go in the opposite direction and rule in favor of the players at the expense of your own enjoyment, you're also doing it wrong. Like a double amputee trying to do a wheelie in his wheelchair only to fall over and crack his skull would tell you. It's all about finding a proper balance. It then turns out that the DM has their own ruling on spells as well. I prep Lightning Bolt with the logic that since we're in corridors and such, it'll be much more reliable than Fireball. I have Fly, so I can fire over my allies' heads. Turns out that even if I'm 10 feet in the air, my feet are in line with my allies' heads. Thus, I would still hit them with Lightning Bolts because it's a line attack and it fills a 5-foot space. No, I don't understand the logic either. So I ask if I can use another spell, which I do, only to be informed that the foes we are facing, more trolls, are immune to acid, fire, and cold, which is the element I've been using since the dual immunity trolls. Eventually, we ask the DM why everything on this floor is so difficult and hard to kill for us. Level 11 at this point, by the way. When it's for level 5 characters. It is then revealed that he's been buffing and modifying things to make it suitably lethal and challenge us. Please remember, we're on this floor because we're down a player and don't want to be facing fights that are super high level and need to map the floors. We expected to rip through the floor, face nothing significant, and move on. We have spent 5 or 6 sessions grinding through a floor for level 5 characters. The next session is a no session. The orc is at the hospital for some minor medical things, so, of course, the Blood Rager doesn't want to play, and the cleric is driving the orc to the hospital. The session after that, I'm in a minor car accident that prevents me from playing, so, again, down 1 player means no Blood Ranger. So, again, down 1 player means no Blood Rager, so no game. We finally get a session in, finish the floor we are on, and decide that if every floor is going to be scaled up to be suitably lethal, we might as well dive to the deepest floor we are likely to survive and try to get better loot. I buy a scroll of Magi and put it in my book, planning to scout the next floor. It's pretty clear from this session that the Blood Rager is just a coin flip of no-show. I've lost my drive to play due to the "it's immune to everything" troll swarms, and the cleric and orc are basically tired of being non-combatants. The next session, the DM asked who's available, and the cleric and the orc both say that they'll be only a few minutes late because of dogs. I inform the DM that the student that I'm tutoring has asked for an extra 15 minutes, thus I'll be about 20 minutes late. The DM then states that the session is cancelled because of players no-showing. Except, we were all there just late. And that it just keeps happening and he doesn't want to run the game. I get being frustrated when your players are late or no-show, but it's not like there was never any reason given. Well, you can guess what the final session was like. Everything was immune to everything. and the only one that did any damage was the TMPC, and the Blood Rager no-showed. The game died a slow and sad death. Not really the normal explosive horror story, but looking back over it, it's clear that it wasn't going to last, and the DM really had no idea how to handle his game. End of story. Ah, jeez. Yeah, it wasn't your explosive final confrontation we've come to expect from RPG horror stories at this point, but I'd argue that this is worse. A slow and painful death like this is just a great way to waste everyone's time. The pain that dragging yourself to a D&D session that you know is just part of the build-up to the death of the campaign is just... It's not a good feeling. What's really got me here is the Blood Rager's immaturity here. The idea of quitting at the second that conditions aren't just perfect for you is just so shitty. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I got my fingers crossed that a bear mauls this Goldilocks, so that OP doesn't have to deal with that level of selfishness anymore. And on that note, how about we take a look at this week's Gallery of the Drake? This week's fan art comes from viewer Calibanzax, who went and created their very own Den of the Drake model. Fun fact, I actually tried to use this model in a game I ran, but my players were less than enthusiastic about it. And that's another TPK.
What? 500d6 psychic damage? Okay, your homebrew is busted. Half of the session was just you counting damage dice.
What? I just wanted it to be realistic. The path of the cringe hoarder unlocks some dark magic.
Okay, that's all well and good, but what about the 300 d10 slashing damage that you dealt me?
Huh. The path of the cringe hoarder also unlocks some sick katana skills.
Alright, I quit.
Me too.
Ah, come on, he hasn't even gotten to use the 50 cal yet. Thank you again, Calibanzax, for submitting your art. If you'd like to see your fan art featured in Gallery of the Drake, be sure to send it to the email in my About section. Fan art is my favorite part of doing YouTube, and it means the world to me that I can inspire artists like you to create artwork like this. With the story over and artwork displayed, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you feel like supporting my channel further, my Patreon and merchandise links are in the description. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake.